February 12th, 2024, Brooklyn, New York. The alarm clock on the nightstand read 6:13 a.m., but Terrence Cole had been awake for 7 minutes already. Not because he'd planned it, not because his body had adjusted to some disciplined morning routine, but because his daughter's cry had cut through the thin walls of their apartment with the precision of a blade finding flesh. He was on his feet before conscious thought could catch up, moving through the darkness of his bedroom toward the sound. 34 years old, 4 months unemployed, and the only system in his life that still functioned with perfect reliability was his body's response to Zoe's distress. The mathematics of fatherhood operated on frequencies beyond reason, beyond exhaustion, beyond the crushing weight of bills he couldn't pay and a future he couldn't promise. The numbers on his phone glowed as he passed. 6:17. The interview wasn't until 9, but sleep had abandoned him anyway, slipping away somewhere around 3 in the morning when he jolted awake calculating whether the subway fare was worth it or if he should walk the 47 blocks to save $2.75. Zoe sat upright in her bed, small hands pressed against the side of her head, blonde braids askew in directions that would have been funny if Terrence's chest hadn't immediately tightened with that familiar dread. 6 years old, and already she'd learned that pain was something you endured quietly until it became unbearable. He'd never taught her that. Life had. He knelt beside her bed, reaching for the damp washcloth he'd learned to keep on her nightstand. 3rd ear infection in 2 months. The pediatrician's voice echoed in his memory with the hollow comfort of medical platitudes. Some children just have recurring infections, usually resolves by age 7 or 8, nothing to worry about. As if a single father with dwindling savings and no steady income could simply choose not to worry. As if concern was a luxury he could afford to surrender. Zoe's fever had broken overnight, but the pain lingered in her eyes, turning them glassy and distant. Terrence pressed the cool cloth gently against her ear, humming the lullaby his own mother used to sing. The melody came automatically, muscle memory from a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. The prescription bottle on the nightstand mocked him with its emptiness. 1 dose left. He'd need to refill it today, which meant another $65 he didn't have. He pulled up his banking app with the hand not holding the washcloth, the screen illuminating his face in harsh blue light. $847. Rent was due in 12 days, on February 24th. The mathematics of poverty had become his constant companion. Every purchase calculated against survival. Every decision weighted with consequences that rippled through weeks and months. The antibiotics cost roughly 8% of his remaining funds. Zoe's comfort was worth infinitely more than that, but the numbers didn't care about worth. They only cared about depletion, about the countdown to 0. Zoe's crying softened to whimpers as the cool cloth did its work, her breathing evening into the rhythm that meant sleep was pulling her back under. Terrence stayed there, kneeling on the worn carpet, until he was certain she'd found peace again. The apartment settled around them in its familiar symphony of mechanical struggles. The radiator's occasional clank and hiss, heat that worked intermittently despite the landlord's promises. The distant sound of someone's television bleeding through walls too thin to contain the lives they held. The knock came at 6:45, soft but deliberate. Mrs. Dorothy Banks had a rhythm to her arrival that meant good morning, meant she was here to help, meant Terrence could breathe a little easier. He opened the door to find his neighbor standing there with her worn canvas bag, 73 years old and more reliable than anyone he'd ever known. Her eyes went immediately to the bathroom, where Terrence had already laid out Zoe's morning medicine, 1 step ahead, always thinking 3 moves forward, the way she'd learned in 42 years of teaching before retirement. Mrs. Banks had been watching Zoe since Terrence's wife left, since Vanessa had decided that motherhood wasn't for her, that the man she'd married and the daughter they'd created were obstacles rather than opportunities. Terrence didn't think about Vanessa much anymore. The anger had faded into something more like bewilderment, a dull confusion that surfaced occasionally when Zoe asked questions he couldn't answer. How could someone walk away from this child's laugh? From the way she said "daddy" like it meant safe, like it meant home, like it meant the whole world was okay as long as he was there. Mrs. Banks set her bag down on the kitchen counter with practiced efficiency. She'd brought applesauce for mixing with Zoe's medicine, and the morning newspaper she still read in print, a relic of habits formed before screens consumed everything. 73 years old and sharper than most people half her age, she moved through the apartment like she'd lived there herself, knowing where every dish belonged, which cabinet held the cups Zoe could reach. Terrence was already dressed, the only suit he owned hanging on his frame with the weight of desperation disguised as professionalism. Charcoal gray fabric that had seen better days, the elbows shining where the material had worn thin, the knees carrying a faint reflection when light hit them wrong. The white button-down shirt had been ironed 6 times before the collar finally lay flat, or as flat as it was going to get. He'd given up on perfection somewhere around the 4th attempt. His shoes were Oxford style, purchased at a thrift store 3 years ago when he'd still believed that looking the part would be enough. The leather had cracked at the heel where he'd tried to repair it with superglue, creating a small ridge that caught against his sock with every step. The backpack leaning against the wall was army surplus, faded green canvas with fraying straps that he'd reinforced with duct tape. Inside, 6 copies of his resume printed at the public library for 20 cents each, a pen, a small notebook, a granola bar in case his stomach betrayed him with nervous hunger. The detritus of desperation organized into something resembling preparedness. Mrs. Banks turned from the counter, her weathered hands folding a dish towel with precise creases. Her voice came quiet, meant for his ears alone, while Zoe slept in the next room. The really strong men aren't the ones who never feel afraid, Terrence. They're the ones who keep standing, even when their hearts are shaking. He wanted to tell her he didn't feel strong. He felt terrified. 4 months of rejections had worn grooves in his confidence, each interview that ended with, "We'll be in touch," carving away another piece of the person he used to be. But Zoe needed him to be strong, and Mrs. Banks needed him to believe it was possible. So he nodded and picked up his backpack and didn't say any of the things that would make the fear real by giving it voice. The subway ride from Brooklyn to Midtown Manhattan took 42 minutes according to the schedule, though Terrence had learned that schedules were suggestions the city rarely honored. He'd made the calculation a dozen times. Subway cost $2.75 versus $20 for a cab, and $20 was Zoe's antibiotics refill, plus a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. The math always came back to survival, every decision a transaction between immediate need and future catastrophe. He sat near the back of the train, reviewing the email on his cracked phone screen for what had to be the 5th time since last night. From HR Recruitment at Whitmore Global. Subject, Interview Confirmation, Operations Coordinator. Your interview is scheduled for 9 a.m., floor 47, suite 4701. Please bring valid identification and be prepared to discuss logistics experience. Whitmore Global is an equal opportunity employer. He knew Whitmore Global the way everyone in New York knew Whitmore Global. The 52-story glass and steel tower in Midtown, the company that appeared in Forbes and Fortune with headlines about Catherine Whitmore, the self-made billionaire who'd built a $2 billion empire from a single real estate deal at 26. The Ice Queen of Manhattan, one article had called her, the woman who never made mistakes. But Terrence had applied to 47 jobs in the past 2 weeks, sending resumes into digital voids that rarely responded. He couldn't remember the specifics of applying to this one, couldn't recall what had made him think he had a chance. The email said, Floor 47, Suite 4701, Operations Coordinator, Entry Level. Probably something in the 40,000 range if he was lucky, maybe 42. Floor 47 seemed high for entry-level interviews, but maybe it was preliminary screening. Maybe they saw everyone on the executive floor first and filtered down from there. The train emerged from the tunnel into gray February daylight, and Terrence watched the city slide past the window. Buildings and bridges and the endless motion of people who all seemed to know exactly where they belonged. His reflection in the glass looked back at him with eyes that hadn't slept well in months, with the particular exhaustion that came from worry compounded by more worry. He checked his phone again. 8:23. Plenty of time. His mind drifted to the warehouse job he'd lost, the logistics company that had closed its doors with an email sent at 8 in the morning on October 3rd. Effective immediately, operations ceased. Severance packages would be processed within 30 days. 340 employees receiving the same message at the same moment, their livelihoods dissolved by corporate decision made somewhere far above their pay grades. The warehouse had been good work, honest work, managing inventory flows, coordinating shipments, solving the thousand small crises that emerged daily in any operation moving physical goods through space and time. Terrence had been good at it too, 7 years building expertise in systems and processes, learning to see the whole picture while managing the details. But expertise didn't matter when the company dissolved. Skill was irrelevant in the face of market forces and investor decisions. The train lurched to a stop at 42nd Street, and Terrence stood, gripping the overhead rail for balance as the car swayed. His watch caught the fluorescent light, a cheap digital thing with a cartoon dinosaur on the face. Zoe had been so proud when she picked it out herself 2 Father's Days ago, presenting it with a ceremony that made the $15 price tag irrelevant. He wore it every single day. Let the interviewers think what they wanted. Whitmore Global Tower rose 52 stories above street level, all glass and gleaming steel that reflected the overcast sky in 1,000 fractured angles. Terrence had walked past it before on his way to other interviews, other rejections, but he'd never imagined walking into it. The lobby was marble and chrome, the floor polished to a mirror shine that made his scuffed shoes look even worse than they were. A security guard sat behind a curved desk that looked like it cost more than Terrence's monthly rent. Young guy, maybe 25, with a kind of easy smile that came from job security and regular paychecks. Name? Terrence Cole. 9 o'clock interview. The guard typed something into his computer, nodded without looking up. Floor 47, elevators on your left. The elevator was glass-walled, rising through the building's atrium, with a view of the floors dropping away below. Terrence's stomach lurched with the acceleration, or maybe with nerves, or maybe with the realization that he was physically ascending into a world where he didn't belong. The numbers climbed. 15, 23, 35, 41. Floor 47 was different. The elevator doors opened onto silence, not the bustling energy of a corporate floor with cubicles and conversation and phones ringing. This was executive territory. Closed office doors with nameplates that read SVP Marketing, EVP Finance, Chief Strategy Officer. Polished glass and recessed lighting, and an almost reverential quiet, like a museum after hours. The reception desk curved in an arc of white marble and brushed steel. Behind it sat a woman in her late 20s, wearing a black suit that probably cost what Terrence used to make in a month. An earpiece sat discreetly in place, her posture suggesting years of training in appearing simultaneously welcoming and intimidating. Her nameplate read, Miranda. Terrence approached, his shoes too loud on the marble floor, each step announcing his presence like a countdown. Miranda's fingers paused over her keyboard, her eyes taking in his appearance in a single, efficient sweep. The worn backpack, the almost pressed shirt, the dinosaur watch. Her expression remained professionally neutral, a mask perfected through practice. How may I help you? Terrence Cole, 9 o'clock interview, operations coordinator position. Miranda's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced speed. Then her brow furrowed, the first imperfection Terrence had witnessed on this entire floor. the first crack in the polished facade. She scrolled, clicked, scrolled again. Her eyes flicked from the screen to Terrence and back. "I don't see a Terrence Cole scheduled for today." The email said 9 o'clock, floor 47, suite 4701. Terrence pulled out his phone, hands suddenly unsteady, and showed her the screen. Miranda's expression shifted into something he couldn't quite identify: uncertainty, concern. She picked up her phone, turning slightly away, voice dropping into tones too low for him to hear clearly. "Yes, Terrence Cole, floor 47. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds, her responses clipped and careful. When she turned back, her demeanor had changed again. Now she looked almost nervous, the way people looked when they discovered a problem they weren't authorized to solve. "Mr. Cole, there's been a scheduling irregularity, but you're expected in conference room A, if you'll follow me." Terrence didn't understand, but he followed because what choice did he have? He'd come this far. Turn back now and he'd spend the rest of his life wondering what if, adding this moment to the collection of opportunities he'd let slip away through cowardice disguised as caution. The hallway stretched before them, all glass walls and closed doors, and the distant hum of expensive ventilation systems that kept the air at precisely controlled temperatures. They passed offices where people stared at multiple monitors with fierce concentration, spaces that looked more like mission control centers than workplaces. Miranda's heels clicked a rhythm against marble that sounded like, "Hurry, hurry, hurry," or maybe, "Run, run, run." Terrence's mouth had gone dry, his palms damp against the straps of his backpack. Conference room A sat at the end of the hall behind frosted glass doors with chrome handles that gleamed under recessed lighting. A small plaque, understated and elegant, "Conference room A." Nothing more, as if the room needed no introduction, as if everyone who mattered already knew its significance. Miranda stopped, gestured toward the doors. "Ms. Whitmore will see you now." The name hit Terrence like cold water. Ms. Whitmore, as in Catherine Whitmore, as in the CEO, as in the billionaire founder who'd built this empire and whose face stared out from magazine covers. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Some mistake, a test, a strange corporate ritual he didn't understand. But Miranda had already turned and walked away, her heels clicking back down the hallway in rapid retreat, leaving him alone before the frosted glass. He could leave, find floor 32, wherever that was, explain the confusion to whoever was supposed to interview him for the actual entry-level position he'd actually applied for. Play it safe. But his hand rose and knocked before the decision fully formed, before fear could calcify into paralysis. A voice from inside, clear and authoritative. "Enter." The conference room was enormous. A table that could seat 20 people dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more individually than Terrence's entire apartment's worth of furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a scale model. Tiny cars and tinier people in a world that seemed impossibly distant from this height. At the head of the table sat Catherine Whitmore. Terrence recognized her from the photographs, but photographs didn't capture the physical presence, the way she commanded space without moving. 52 years old and looking a decade younger, silver blonde hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Black Armani suit, white silk blouse, eyes the color of storm clouds, fixed on Terrence with an intensity that made him want to apologize for things he hadn't done. "Sit." Not a request, a command. The word carried weight that filled the room, leaving no space for negotiation. Terrence sat in the chair nearest the door, then immediately second-guessed the choice. Should he have sat closer? Did it matter? Why did everything suddenly feel like a test he was failing? Catherine studied him without speaking. The silence stretched, 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Her gaze traveled from his face to the worn backpack still clutched against his chest, to his scuffed shoes, to the cartoon dinosaur watch on his wrist. Her expression revealed nothing, not approval, not disapproval, just cold calculation. The assessment of a mind that had built billions by reading people accurately and betting accordingly. Terrence Cole. She glanced at a tablet before her, the gesture perfunctory. Your resume is interesting. His throat went dry. He hadn't submitted a resume specifically to the CEO's office. This was wrong, all wrong, but backing out now seemed even worse than pushing forward. He was here. She was here. The room existed in this moment of mutual presence, and retreating would mean admitting defeat before the battle even began. Thank you, ma'am. The words came out steadier than he felt. Tell me about yourself, the most standard interview question in existence. And yet Terrence's mind went completely blank. Tell this woman, this billionaire who employed thousands, whose decisions affected millions, about Terrence Cole, single father, unemployed warehouse manager, man whose greatest recent achievement was successfully getting his daughter to take her medicine without complaint. I'm a hard worker. The words sounded hollow even as he spoke them. I believe in showing up on time and doing whatever needs to be done. I don't make excuses, and I don't leave problems for other people to solve. Catherine's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. That's not what I asked. I asked you to tell me about yourself. Who is Terrence Cole? The deflection had failed. She'd seen through it instantly. Terrence felt heat rise in his face. She deserved better than corporate platitudes, these rehearsed phrases he'd memorized from job-hunting websites. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she was testing him, seeing how he performed under pressure. And the only winning move was to play the game by rules he didn't understand. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not kindness exactly, but a kind of fierce attention that demanded honesty. She was actually listening, not waiting for her turn to speak, not mentally cataloging his flaws. Listening with the focus of someone who cared about the answer. I'm a single father. My daughter Zoe is 6 years old. She's the reason I get up in the morning and the reason I don't quit when things get hard. I used to work warehouse logistics, inventory management, shipping coordination, the kind of work most people don't think about until something goes wrong. I was good at it. Then the company downsized, and now I'm here. He paused, suddenly aware that he'd probably said too much. Interviewers didn't want to hear about personal lives, about 6-year-old daughters and warehouse jobs, and the quiet desperation of trying to hold everything together with both hands. But Catherine Whitmore was leaning forward now, something shifting in those gray eyes. Interest maybe, or curiosity, something that suggested she was actually processing his words instead of just waiting for him to finish so she could move to the next scripted question. Tell me about crisis management in logistics. What did a typical crisis look like, and how did you handle it? Terrence relaxed slightly. This he could talk about. This was familiar territory where his competence could speak louder than his circumstances. In a warehouse, crises happen daily. Shipments get delayed, inventory goes missing, a client needs something tomorrow that you don't have until next week. I learned that the most important thing isn't solving the immediate problem. It's preventing the next 10 problems that the first one will cause. You have to see the whole system, understand how one failure cascades into others, address the root cause while still managing the symptoms. Give me a specific example. Last year, before the layoffs, we had a situation where one of our biggest clients needed an emergency shipment. 3,000 units of a product that was technically in stock, but had been mislabeled and scattered across 4 different warehouse sections. The client needed delivery within 8 hours to make their own deadline. My supervisor wanted to just apologize, tell them we couldn't make it happen. What did you do? I mapped the warehouse in my head, every section, every possible location where that product might be. I pulled 5 people from other tasks, people who trusted me, who knew I wouldn't waste their time. We ran a coordinated search, while I simultaneously arranged emergency transportation. Found all 3,000 units within 3 hours. Delivered 2 hours ahead of deadline. Catherine's expression remained unreadable, but she hadn't looked away. That's operational problem solving. What about crisis management under emotional pressure? When the stakes are personal? The question caught Terrence off guard. Most interviews stuck to predictable scripts, safe questions with rehearsed answers. This felt different. This felt like Catherine Whitmore was trying to understand something about him that couldn't be captured in bullet points and professional references. When Zoe was 3, she had a febrile seizure. Do you know what those are? I don't. When young children get high fevers, sometimes their bodies respond by seizing. It's terrifying to watch. Your child goes rigid, their eyes roll back, and for anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes, there's nothing you can do but keep them safe and wait. Terrence's voice had gone quiet but steady, the way it always did when he talked about that night. The first time it happened, I was alone with her. My hands wanted to shake. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But Zoe needed me to be calm. She needed me to remember what the pediatrician had said to do in emergencies. She needed me to be her father, not a frightened man falling apart. He met Catherine's eyes directly. I cleared the space around her, turned her on her side, timed the seizure on my watch. This watch. He gestured at the cartoon dinosaur. Spoke to her gently so that if any part of her could hear me, she'd know she wasn't alone. When it ended, I held her while I called 911, and I gave them every piece of information they needed clearly and completely. Because falling apart wouldn't help my daughter. Staying calm would. The conference room was silent. Outside the windows, the city continued its indifferent business. Millions of people moving through their lives completely unaware that in this room, something was shifting. That in 37 minutes of conversation, two strangers were discovering that maybe they understood each other in ways neither had expected. That's crisis management. Terrence's voice remained steady. Not boardroom strategy or executive playbooks. Just a parent making the decision in real time to be what their child needs them to be. Catherine Whitmore sat back in her chair. For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across her features. Or maybe Terrence was imagining it. Maybe he was so desperate for validation that he was seeing things that weren't there, projecting hope onto a woman whose expression had probably been schooled through decades of negotiations not to reveal anything she didn't choose to reveal. Mr. Cole, Catherine's voice was slow, deliberate. What do you think this interview is for? Operations coordinator position, floor 32. And yet you're on floor 47, in my personal conference room, being interviewed by me. The words hung in the air, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture Terrence had constructed. The pieces started clicking together in his mind, fragments assembling into a picture he didn't want to see. The confusion at reception, Miranda's nervousness, the way Catherine had been studying him from the moment he walked in, not like someone conducting a routine interview, but like someone trying to solve an equation with unexpected variables. There was a mistake. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that landed between them with the weight of inevitability. Yes, Catherine's voice was flat, professional. A rather significant one. You were somehow routed to my calendar instead of the appropriate hiring manager. You're not supposed to be here, Mr. Cole. You're supposed to be on floor 32, interviewing for an entry-level logistics position that pays roughly $42,000 annually. The positions I oversee personally start at 6 figures and require credentials you don't possess. Terrence felt the blood drain from his face. Of course this had been a mistake. Nothing in his life worked out this smoothly. He'd walked into the wrong room, spoken to the wrong person, probably wasted this incredibly powerful woman's time, and embarrassed himself in ways that would somehow follow him, because that's how the universe seemed to work for people like him. For people who looked like him in spaces like this. He stood abruptly, grabbing his worn backpack. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'll find the right floor, conduct the actual interview. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Sit down. The words cut through his rushed apology like a blade. Not loud, not angry, just absolute. The voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Terrence sat, almost involuntarily, his body responding to the command before his brain caught up. Catherine Whitmore was watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Her fingers were steepled beneath her chin, and she seemed to be making some kind of decision, weighing variables Terrence couldn't see. When you realized this was a mistake, your first instinct was to apologize, to assume the error was your fault, to prepare for rejection before it even came. Her pause felt deliberate. Why? Because it usually is my fault. Or if it isn't, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. That's not an answer. That's a deflection wrapped in self-deprecation. I don't understand what you want me to say. I want you to tell me why a man who clearly has competence, who clearly has experience managing complex situations under pressure, who clearly has the kind of practical intelligence that most MBA graduates couldn't develop in a lifetime, why does that man assume he's the one who made the mistake? Terrence felt something crack inside him. A wall he'd built so carefully over so many years, made of quiet acceptance and lowered expectations, and the understanding that people like him didn't get to want too much. Because hope is expensive, and I can't afford the cost when it doesn't pan out. I have a daughter to raise, rent to pay. I don't have the luxury of believing I deserve better. I just need to survive long enough to give her a chance at something different. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Catherine Whitmore stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city below. Her reflection ghosted against the glass, a shadow version of herself. I've interviewed over 3,000 people in my career. Her voice came without her turning around. CEOs, presidents of major corporations, candidates with Ivy League degrees and perfect resumes, and answers so polished you could see your reflection in them. She paused. Do you know what most of them have in common? Terrence waited. They lie. Not about the big things. They're too smart for that. They lie about the small things. They lie about who they really are. They present the version of themselves they think I want to see, and they assume I can't tell the difference. Now she turned, fixing him with those gray eyes. You haven't lied to me once. I don't have anything worth lying about. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Cole. Catherine walked back toward the table but didn't sit. She stood looking down at him with an expression that had shifted into something almost curious. You have something most of the people who walk into this room lack entirely. You have competence without ego, strength without performance. You handled a crisis with your daughter that would have broken most people, and you described it without a hint of self-aggrandizement. You spoke about your work history without inflating it, without embellishing, without trying to make yourself seem more important than you were. Terrence didn't know what to say. He sat there in his scuffed shoes and his cartoon dinosaur watch, feeling more exposed than he'd ever felt in his life. The interview was a mistake. Catherine's tone remained measured. The scheduling error was my assistant's fault. She'll be addressed. But I've learned over the years that mistakes sometimes reveal things that perfection hides. She paused, and something flickered across her face, something almost human. I have a problem in this company. Not a crisis yet, but the kind of thing that becomes a crisis if it's not handled properly. It's a coordination issue, logistics, the kind of problem that requires someone who can see whole systems, who can manage pressure without cracking, who can earn trust from people without demanding it. Terrence felt his heart rate increase. What are you saying? I'm saying that you walked into the wrong room, Mr. Cole, and you might have walked into exactly where you needed to be. Catherine returned to her seat but didn't sit. She stood behind the chair, hands resting on its back. I'm offering you a trial, 3 months. You'll work directly with my operations team as a special projects consultant, reporting to William Hayes. The pay will be $84,000 annually. The hours will be demanding. The pressure will be significant. And if you fail, you'll be terminated without severance. Terrence's mind raced. Double what he'd hoped for, triple the responsibility, everything to lose, everything to gain. He thought of Zoe's ear infections, of the pediatrician bills he could barely cover, of the apartment with the broken heater that his landlord kept promising to fix. A question escaped before he could stop it. "You don't know me." 37 minutes of conversation. Catherine Whitmore almost smiled. Almost. "Because I've built $1 billion company by trusting my judgment, Mr. Cole. And my judgment tells me that you're not a mistake. You're an opportunity." She leaned forward slightly. "The question is, are you brave enough to take it?" Terrence thought of Zoe's face when she woke up feeling better, her laugh when he made her favorite breakfast, her hand in his when they walked to school together, trusting him completely, believing without question that her father would take care of her. He thought of all the times he'd played it safe, all the jobs he hadn't applied for because he didn't feel qualified, all the opportunities he'd talked himself out of before even trying. "I have conditions." The words came out before courage could abandon him. Catherine's eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating with me. I have a daughter. She comes first. Always. If there's ever a choice between this job and taking care of her, I'll choose her every time. If that's not acceptable, then this won't work and we're both wasting our time." For a long moment, Catherine Whitmore simply looked at him. Then something extraordinary happened. She smiled. A real smile, small but genuine, transforming her sharp features into something almost warm. "That's the first sensible thing a potential employee has said to me in years. Family should come first. The fact that you said it out loud, that you made it non-negotiable, tells me more about your character than anything else you've said today." She extended her hand across the table. "Welcome to Whitmore Global, Mr. Cole. I have a feeling you're going to surprise a lot of people." Terrence reached out and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but not cold. He felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he thought was permanently sealed. "You already have," Catherine said quietly. Terrence left the building at 10:14 in a daze. The subway ride home existed in a blur he couldn't quite piece together afterward. He remembered the elevator descent, the lobby's marble floors, the security guard's friendly nod. He remembered stepping onto the street and blinking in the gray February light. He remembered pulling out his phone and seeing Mrs. Banks's text. "Zoe asking when you'll be home. Says she has something important to show you." His fingers moved over the cracked screen. "On my way. Tell her I have something to tell her too." The train car was half empty at this hour, mid-morning commuters scattered across worn seats. Terrence sat near the back, his mind still processing. $84,000, double his target, triple his last salary, a 3-month trial that could change everything, or confirm his worst fears about reaching for things beyond his grasp. But Zoe needed new shoes, real new shoes from an actual store, not held together with duct tape and hope. The heater needed fixing. The antibiotics needed refilling. And for the first time in 4 months, Terrence could imagine paying for all of it without the constant calculation of sacrifice. Mrs. Banks was waiting in the doorway when he arrived, Zoe in her arms. His daughter's face lit up the moment she saw him, that brilliant, uncomplicated joy that only children can offer. She squirmed free and ran toward him, braids bouncing with each step. "Daddy, you're back early. Did the interview go bad?" Terrence knelt down to catch her, wrapping his arms around her small body and holding her tight. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and Mrs. Banks's cookies, and something else uniquely Zoe, something that meant home and safety and the reason he kept fighting. "Actually, sweetheart, I think it went really well." Zoe's eyes went wide. "Really? Did you get the job?" "I got a job. Maybe not the one I went for, but a better one." "What kind of job?" "The kind that means Daddy won't have to worry so much anymore. The kind that means we can fix the heater and maybe get you some new shoes for school." Zoe looked down at her sneakers, which were held together in places by creativity and determination. "Real new shoes? Not from the thrift store?" Real new shoes from an actual store. She threw her arms around his neck again, squeezing so tight it almost hurt. I knew you could do it, Daddy. I knew it. Mrs. Banks was watching from the doorway, her weathered face creased with a gentle smile. I take it the good news has arrived. The best news. Terrence stood, lifting Zoe onto his hip. He paused, something occurring to him. Actually, I need to ask you something. The new job is going to have longer hours, more demanding schedule. I was wondering if you knew anyone who might be able to help with Zoe on the days when I can't make it back in time. Mrs. Banks's expression softened. We'll figure something out, Terrence. We always do. She reached out and patted his arm. I'm proud of you, and so would your mother be if she could see you now. Terrence's throat tightened. His mother had passed away 3 years ago, cancer aggressive and fast, taking her before he'd had a chance to say half the things he'd wanted to say. She'd never met Zoe. She'd never seen Terrence become a father, struggle with single parenthood, find a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Thank you for everything, he managed. That evening after Mrs. Banks went home, and Zoe had eaten her dinner, macaroni and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, her favorite, Terrence sat with his daughter in their small living room. The apartment was cramped, 2 bedrooms, though one was barely larger than a closet, a kitchen that required creative navigation, but he'd worked hard to make it feel like home. Zoe's drawings covered the refrigerator. A small bookshelf held her favorite stories, most checked out from the library and renewed so many times the librarians had started joking about just giving them to her. Daddy, Zoe's voice was sleepy. She was curled up against his side on the worn couch, her head resting on his arm. Are you scared about the new job? Terrence thought about lying, about protecting her from adult concerns, maintaining the illusion that parents always knew what they were doing. But Zoe deserved better than comfortable lies. A little bit. It's a big change. The work will be hard, and I'll be learning a lot of new things. But I'm also excited. I think this could be really good for us. Zoe was quiet for a moment, processing with the gravity that children bring to important things. Mrs. Banks says that being scared means you're doing something important. She says you can be scared and brave at the same time. Mrs. Banks is a very smart woman. She also says you're the best daddy she's ever seen. Zoe looked up at him with eyes that held absolute trust. I think so too. Terrence felt something crack in his chest, that wall again, the one Catherine Whitmore had somehow seen right through. I love you, sweetheart. More than anything in this world I know, Daddy. She yawned, her eyes starting to flutter closed. You tell me every day. He carried her to bed, tucking her in with the routine they'd performed 1,000 times. Blanket pulled up just below her chin. Mr. Hoppy, the stuffed rabbit named with 6-year-old Decree, nestled against her side. Nightlight casting soft stars across the ceiling. Good night, sweetheart. Night, Daddy. Her voice was already thick with approaching sleep. Don't forget to dream about good things. I won't. Terrence stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. In and out. In and out. The steady rhythm of a child at peace, safe in the knowledge that her father was there, that he would always be there, that nothing in the world could reach her while he stood guard. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An email notification from Whitmore Global. Terrence's heart rate spiked as he opened it. Mr. Cole, please report to floor 45, suite 4512 at 8 a.m. Monday morning, February 19th. You will be met by William Hayes, head of operations, who will oversee your onboarding process. Your trial period begins immediately. I expect regular updates on your progress. Do not disappoint me. Catherine Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Global. Terrence read the email 3 times, then sat down heavily on the couch. Monday, 5 days away. 5 days to prepare for the biggest opportunity of his life. 5 days to convince himself he wasn't making a terrible mistake. But sitting there in his quiet apartment with his daughter sleeping down the hall, and a future suddenly opening before him like a door he'd never expected to find, he realized something. Alone didn't mean helpless. Alone didn't mean worthless. Alone just meant he'd have to be strong enough for two. And he had been strong enough for two for 6 years now. Maybe it was time to believe he could be strong enough for this too. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation that felt simultaneously too long and not long enough. Saturday morning, February 17th, Terrence took Zoe to Target. Not the thrift store where they'd spent the last 4 months hunting through racks of other people's discarded lives. Actual Target, with its fluorescent lights and price tags that didn't require calculation against next week's grocery budget. 3 white button-down shirts at $19.99 each. 2 pairs of khaki pants at $29.99. Zoe helped him pick out a tie, navy blue with small silver diamonds woven through the fabric in a pattern that caught the light when he held it up. Professional but not boring, Daddy. She studied it with the serious concentration of a 6-year-old art critic, then nodded with finality. This one. The total came to $137.43. Terrence's hand hesitated over his debit card for only a moment before he swiped it. He had a job now, a real job with a real salary that would start in 6 days. The math still felt surreal, like he was spending someone else's money, living someone else's life. The haircut came next, at the barber shop 2 blocks from their apartment, where Mr. Washington had been cutting hair for 40 years. The old man was 68, his own hair gone silver, his hands steady despite arthritis that made the scissors click with a rhythm Terrence had known since childhood. "Your father used to come here, Mr." Washington's voice was soft, conversational, the kind of talk that filled space without demanding response. "Sat in that same chair you're in now. Good man. I was sorry when he passed." Terrence said nothing. His father had died when Terrence was 12, a heart attack at 43 that took him between one breath and the next. 22 years gone, and the absence still felt fresh sometimes, a wound that never quite healed. "I'm not charging you full price today." Mr. Washington's scissors moved with practiced efficiency, each snip deliberate. "You're starting a new job. That's worth celebrating." Zoe watched from the waiting chair, swinging her legs, pride radiating from her small frame. She'd insisted on coming, wanted to be part of this transformation from unemployed to employable. When Mr. Washington finished, she clapped her hands together. "You look important now, Daddy." Sunday night, Terrence couldn't sleep. He lay in bed reviewing everything he could remember about Whitmore Global, scrolling through LinkedIn on his phone until the screen's blue light made his eyes ache. Catherine Whitmore's profile was sparse, professional photo and job title, but no personal details. No insights into the woman who'd hired him based on 37 minutes and instinct. The articles were more revealing. Business Insider had done a feature 2 years ago, "The Ice Queen of Manhattan, How Catherine Whitmore Built an Empire." It detailed her first deal at 26, borrowing money from everyone who would lend it, working 20-hour days for 6 months straight, turning profit when everyone said she'd fail. The company had grown from that single transaction into a constellation of holdings: real estate development, technology investments, a hospitality division managing hotels across 3 continents, a logistics arm moving goods worth billions annually. One quote stuck with Terrence. "People said I was crazy, that I didn't know my place, that someone like me would never make it in their world. So I built my own world, and then I invited them to play by my rules." He set his phone down and stared at the ceiling, at the crack that ran from the corner to the light fixture, a flaw he'd stopped noticing until tonight, when everything felt suddenly uncertain again. What had he gotten himself into? This woman had built an empire. He was a warehouse manager with a high school diploma and a daughter who needed him. But Zoe needed more than survival. She needed a future. And Catherine Whitmore had offered him a chance to build one. The alarm went off at 5:30 Monday morning, February 19th. Terrence was already awake, had been awake since 4. his mind racing through possibilities and fears in equal measure. He showered in water that turned cold after 6 minutes, shaved with a disposable razor that pulled at his stubble, dressed in one of the new shirts and the navy tie Zoe had chosen. The knot sat properly this time, centered and neat. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. The suit fit better than his old one, the shirt crisp against his skin. He looked like he belonged in an office tower. He looked like someone Catherine Whitmore might have hired on purpose, rather than by mistake. Zoe was still sleeping when he kissed her forehead goodbye. Mrs. Banks arrived at 6:30, earlier than usual, bringing oatmeal and encouragement wrapped in her steady presence. "You've got this, Terrence. Remember what I told you about being scared and brave at the same time?" The subway was crowded with Monday morning commuters, everyone moving with the efficiency of routine, their faces blank with the particular exhaustion that came from doing the same thing week after week after week. Terrence stood near the door, gripping the overhead rail, his new backpack purchased Saturday for $39 at Target, holding a notebook and 3 pens in the desperate hope that he wouldn't completely embarrass himself. Whitmore Global Tower looked different on Monday morning. Still imposing, still glass and steel reaching toward an overcast sky, but now it was his workplace. The security guard was different too, an older man with gray at his temples who smiled and handed him a temporary badge. Terrence Cole, expected floor 45. Have a great first day. Floor 45 was nothing like floor 47. The elevator doors opened onto organized chaos, the sound hitting him like a wave. People moved between desks with purpose that bordered on urgency. Phones rang with overlapping rhythms. Conversations layered over each other, words blending into a symphony of productivity. Large monitors displayed what looked like project timelines and logistics maps spanning continents, networks of connection that made his warehouse work seem small by comparison. "You must be Cole." The voice came from his left, and Terrence turned to find a man approaching. White, mid-50s, graying hair cut short, wire-rimmed glasses, blue shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows. His expression was assessing but not unkind, the look of someone who'd learned to measure people quickly. "I'm William Hayes, head of operations." He extended his hand and Terrence shook it, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested this man had done physical work once upon a time. "Catherine told me about you, said you walked into the wrong interview and somehow walked out with a job." "That's one way to describe it." William almost smiled, a brief flicker at the corner of his mouth. "She also said you were honest to a fault and had logistics experience. We'll see about the first part. The second part is what I care about. Come on, I'll show you around and then we'll see what you're made of." The tour was brief but comprehensive. William walked Terrence through the operations floor, explaining Whitmore Global's structure in broad strokes, while people worked around them with barely a glance at the new arrival. Real estate development anchored the foundation. Technology investments spread risk across emerging markets. Hospitality managed properties from Miami to Seattle. Logistics moved everything that needed moving, from construction materials to high-end furniture to emergency medical supplies. Catherine started with one real estate deal. William's tone carried something between admiration and exhaustion. Borrowed money from everyone who would lend it, worked 20-hour days, turned profit within 18 months. Now she's worth, well, the number changes with the market, but let's say she doesn't worry about money. They stopped at a cluster of desks near the windows where 4 people worked with the kind of focus Terrence recognized from his warehouse days. These were the people who kept things running while everyone else took credit. "Team, this is Terrence Cole." William's voice cut through the ambient noise with practiced authority. "He's joining us on a trial basis, reporting directly to me. Make him feel welcome. Answer his questions. And don't be gentle with feedback. He needs to learn fast." The introductions came rapid fire. Raymond Hayes, 60 years old with a weathered face that suggested he'd earned his position through decades rather than credentials. William's brother, Terrence would learn later, though they worked together with the professional distance of people who'd learned to separate family from business. Warehouse guy, right? Raymond looked up from his monitor with eyes that had seen too many new hires come and go. I started in warehouses too, 30 years ago, back when everything was on paper. That must have been a nightmare. Raymond's expression shifted, something that might have been a smile. It was character building. Welcome to the circus, son. Try to keep up. Lisa Montgomery handled scheduling and resource allocation, barely looking up from her screen where color-coded calendars competed for space. David Mitchell managed client communications, young and sharp-eyed, the kind of ambitious that could cut both ways. Sarah Peterson ran the technology systems that tracked everything, her fingers moving across 3 keyboards like a concert pianist playing different instruments simultaneously. William gestured toward an empty desk near Raymond's station. You'll shadow each team member, learn our systems, processes, frustrations, take notes, ask questions. Do not make decisions above your level. Your job for the next 3 months: watch, learn, prove you can keep up. After that, we'll evaluate. If you're still standing, we'll talk about next steps. The first week was drowning in the best possible way. Terrence arrived at 7:30 every morning and rarely left before 7 at night. He shadowed Lisa through scheduling nightmares that spanned 3 time zones, learned that the hardest part wasn't logistics, but politics. Everyone thought their project was most important, and making the whole thing work, despite everyone pulling different directions, required diplomatic skills he was still developing. He took notes in a spiral notebook, the same kind he'd used in the warehouse, filling page after page with observations and questions. The work was complex, but the underlying logic was familiar. Move resources from where they were to where they needed to be. Anticipate bottlenecks before they became problems. Communicate clearly and constantly. Trust the systems but verify the results. What surprised Terrence was how much of the job was about people rather than processes. Understanding motivations, managing expectations, navigating the delicate dance of egos and territories that defined corporate life. In the warehouse, problems were concrete: a shipment delayed, inventory missing, a forklift broken. Here, problems were often invisible until they exploded into crises, tensions building beneath surfaces that looked perfectly smooth. He was also acutely aware that he was one of 3 black employees on a floor of 60. The other 2 were junior associates who kept their heads down and their interactions minimal, as if they'd learned that visibility carried risks. Terrence had learned that lesson too, in every job he'd ever held. Be twice as good to get half the credit. Smile at jokes that weren't funny. Make white colleagues comfortable with your presence. The calculus of survival in spaces not built for people who look like him. For a black man in corporate America, every word mattered. One wrong phrase could confirm biases he'd spent his life fighting against. One moment of anger could transform him from colleague into threat. The mental gymnastics required to navigate these unspoken rules was exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with the actual work. Wednesday of his second week, March 6th, brought his first mistake: a miscommunication about a meeting time. Terrence had thought 3 in the afternoon, but it was actually 2. The error resulted in a minor scheduling conflict. 2 managers annoyed because they'd had to wait 15 minutes before realizing the meeting wasn't happening. Nothing catastrophic, but William called Terrence into his office afterward. The room was smaller than Catherine's, with windows that faced east toward the river. William sat behind a desk covered in project files and coffee rings, gesturing for Terrence to sit. What happened? Terrence didn't make excuses, didn't try to shift blame to the email system or the junior associate who'd forwarded him the information. I thought the meeting was confirmed for 3. Didn't verify with all parties. The conflict was my fault. William studied him for a long moment, expression unreadable. Most people in your position would blame the system, claim miscommunication from someone else, find some way to shift responsibility. That wouldn't be true. No, it wouldn't. William's expression softened fractionally, a thaw so subtle Terrence almost missed it. Fix it. Make sure it doesn't happen again. And remember, admitting mistakes doesn't make you weak, makes you trustworthy. Terrence implemented a double-check protocol after that, verifying every detail twice before considering anything confirmed. It added time to his workflow, but eliminated errors. By the end of week 3, the team had started warming to him in small ways. Raymond shared coffee from the break room, explaining the political dynamics of different departments. Lisa asked his opinion on a resource allocation problem, actually listening to his answer. David stopped treating him like furniture. But on Thursday of week 3, March 14th, Terrence noticed something off. A file folder that had been on his desk Tuesday morning was missing Wednesday. It reappeared Thursday with no explanation, the contents seemingly undisturbed, but the timing strange enough to register as wrong. Friday afternoon in the break room, he approached to find 2 junior associates in mid-conversation. The moment they saw him, they stopped talking, exchanging a glance he couldn't interpret. One of them smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Raymond pulled him aside after they left, voice low enough that it didn't carry beyond their corner. "You've got enemies, Cole." Terrence blinked at the name. Raymond had been calling him that since day one, some quirk Terrence hadn't questioned. "What do you mean?" "People who don't like how fast you're rising. 3 weeks and you've already got William's respect. That threatens some folks." "I've barely done anything." "That's the point. You've been here 3 weeks, already making improvements. Some people have been here years without accomplishing half that." Raymond glanced around, ensuring privacy. "Just watch your back. Morrison has friends." "Who's Morrison?" Raymond's expression darkened in a way that made Terrence's stomach tighten. "Bradley Morrison, senior attorney, 12 years with the company, been passed over for promotion 3 times. Blames everyone but himself. Word is he's not happy about Catherine's new hire." The warning settled like cold water in Terrence's stomach, but there was no time to dwell on unnamed threats. The work consumed him, the learning curve steep enough that he went home each night with his brain feeling simultaneously full and empty, saturated with information, but hungry for more. Monday morning of week 4, March 18th, Catherine Whitmore appeared on the operations floor. The transformation was instant. People straightened at their desks as if an electric current had passed through the room. Conversations hushed mid-sentence. Even the phones seemed to ring more quietly. Catherine moved through the floor with William at her side, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. She wore charcoal gray today instead of black, her hair pulled back in that same severe style, her eyes missing nothing as she conducted what was clearly a routine inspection. She stopped at their cluster of desks. Terrence stood, heart hammering against his ribs, with a force that felt visible through his shirt. "Cole." Her voice was neutral, professional, revealing nothing. "How are you finding things?" "Challenging, ma'am, but I'm learning. William tells me you're adapting well, taking responsibility for mistakes, no excuses. That's rare." Catherine's gaze held his for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. "I'll be watching your progress. Don't give me reason to regret my decision." "I won't." She moved on, continuing her inspection, and Terrence released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Raymond leaned over the moment Catherine was out of earshot. "That went well." "Did it?" "Trust me, if she wasn't satisfied, you'd know. She's made people cry in under 30 seconds. You got neutral assessment. In Catherine's world, neutral equals approval." Week 11 arrived with mounting tension, the 3-month mark approaching like a deadline that would determine everything. Terrence had 1 week before his evaluation, 1 week to prove that Catherine's instinct hadn't been wrong, that he belonged here despite the missing credentials and the suspicious circumstances of his hiring. Friday night, May 3rd, Zoe asked the question he'd been avoiding. They were on the couch, her evening routine complete, Mr. Hoppy tucked under her arm. "Daddy, are you going to keep your job?" I hope so, sweetheart. We'll find out next week. What if they say no? Then we'll figure something else out. We always do. But you like this job. Zoe's perception was knife-sharp despite her age. Or maybe because of it. Children saw things adults learned to ignore. You smile more now. Terrence realized she was right. Despite the stress and the long hours and the constant feeling of being tested, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The sense that his work mattered beyond a paycheck. That his contributions were building towards something larger than himself. Saturday, May 4th, he reviewed 3 months of notes, preparing for whatever evaluation William had planned. Pages and pages of observations, questions asked and answered, problems solved, and lessons learned. He'd filled 2 notebooks completely, was halfway through a third. The accumulation of knowledge felt substantial in his hands, evidence that he'd absorbed something meaningful. Sunday night, sleep eluded him again. At 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed with an email that made his chest tighten. From Catherine Whitmore. Subject, schedule change. Evaluation meeting moved to Monday, 10 a.m. I will attend. Terrence closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness of his bedroom, please, let this work out. Monday morning, May 6th, at 9:45, Terrence sat in a conference room on floor 45. Smaller than the one where he'd first met Catherine, but still intimidating with its glass walls and leather chairs that probably cost more than his monthly rent. William entered first with a professional nod that revealed nothing. Catherine followed at precisely 10:02, sitting at the head of the table with an HR director Terrence didn't recognize. William opened a folder, his voice taking on the formal tone of official proceedings. Terrence Cole, 3-month probationary review. Performance metrics. Attendance excellent. 0 tardiness. Error rate. 1 incident week 2. Self-reported and corrected. 0 errors since. Team integration. Positive feedback from all members. Technical competency. Exceeds expectations for entry-level consultant. Catherine's fingers were steepled beneath her chin, her expression giving away nothing. Mr. Cole, what have you learned in 3 months? Terrence had prepared for this question, had rehearsed various answers that sounded impressive and professional. But sitting across from Catherine, he found himself abandoning the script in favor of truth. That operations isn't just moving things efficiently, it's understanding people. What motivates them, what frustrates them. The best systems account for human behavior, not just optimal workflows. Give me an example of applying that insight. Week 5. David was overwhelmed with client calls, couldn't keep up. Instead of just redistributing his workload, I asked why so many calls were coming in. Discovered clients weren't getting proactive updates, so they called because they were anxious. We implemented daily status emails. Call volume dropped 40%. William's eyebrows rose slightly, something like approval crossing his features. I wasn't aware you'd done that. Catherine and William exchanged a glance that Terrence couldn't decipher. The silence stretched long enough that sweat began to form at his collar, despite the room's temperature-controlled air. Then Catherine spoke, her voice carrying the weight of finality. Mr. Cole, your probationary period is complete. You're being converted to permanent status effective today. Title, Special Projects Director. Salary, $95,000. Relief flooded through Terrence's chest, a wave so powerful it made him dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is when real work begins. 2 weeks later, May 21st, Bradley Morrison appeared at Terrence's office door. Terrence had graduated from the shared desk space to a small office with a window, nothing compared to the executive suites, but his own space with his own nameplate. He was reviewing quarterly logistics reports when the shadow fell across his desk. Terrence Cole. The voice was smooth, practiced in the way of people who'd learned to weaponize charm. Heard a lot about you. Terrence looked up to find a man in his mid-40s, expensive suit, Harvard law ring catching the light. The smile didn't reach his eyes, staying fixed on his lips like a mask. Bradley Morrison. He extended his hand and Terrence shook it, noting the grip that lasted a fraction too long, applied pressure that suggested dominance rather than greeting. Catherine's golden boy, warehouse worker to director in 3 months. That's quite a trajectory. Just trying to do good work, aren't we all? Morrison's smile remained fixed, artificial in its perfection. Well, welcome to the team. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other. After Morrison left, Raymond materialized at Terrence's door as if he'd been waiting for the encounter to end. That man is poison. You've mentioned. Passed over for promotion 3 times. Blames everyone but himself. Now he sees you as a threat. Raymond's expression was grave. I've seen him go after people before. Be careful. I'm not trying to threaten anyone. Doesn't matter what you're trying, matters what he thinks. The crisis hit on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Morrison's visit. May 7th, 2:47 in the afternoon. Terrence was at his desk reviewing shipping schedules for a hospitality project in Miami when the first alert came through on the internal system. Priority flag, client emergency. Major client Richard Peton of Peton Development had discovered a critical error in a property acquisition. Documents misfiled, deadlines missed, the entire deal in danger of collapsing. Peton was threatening to terminate their partnership with Whitmore Global entirely. $20 million annually, gone. William was in Seattle at a conference. Catherine was in London handling an acquisition, 8 hours ahead, middle of the night there. The chain of command was paralyzed, people looking at each other with wide eyes in silent panic, everyone hoping someone else would step up and take control. Terrence watched the chaos unfold. People making calls that went unanswered, sending emails that would take hours to process, hoping someone with more authority would materialize and tell them what to do. No one did. He thought about what William had told him during his first week. Stay in your lane. Don't make decisions above your level. He thought about what Catherine had seen in him during that first interview, the ability to act when action was required. He thought about Zoe, about the life he was building for her, about how easily it could all disappear if he made the wrong choice. Where's the client now? His voice cut through the paralyzed chatter. Lisa looked up, surprise evident on her face. Conference room B, floor 43. But Cole, you don't have authority to negotiate with clients. If you go in there and make things worse, who has the files on this deal? Original documents, timeline, everything. Legal has them, but they're not going to just hand them over to. Get them. I'm going to talk to the client. The room went silent. Raymond was staring at him with something that might have been alarm or might have been respect. Terrence couldn't tell which. Cole, you don't have authority for this. If you screw it up, Catherine will have your head. She'll have my head anyway if this deal falls apart and no one even tried to fix it. Get me those files. 10 minutes. The elevator ride to floor 43 felt eternal, his mind racing through everything he'd learned about contracts and deadlines, and the way panic made people forget to look for solutions. Crisis management wasn't about having all the answers. It was about staying calm, gathering information, finding a path forward when everyone else was too frightened to think. Conference room B sat at the end of a hallway. Through the glass walls, Terrence could see a man pacing. Late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, body language broadcasting fury with every sharp movement. Terrence opened the door. The man whirled to face him. Who the hell are you? I asked for someone with authority. Are you someone with authority? I'm Terrence Cole, Special Projects Director. I work directly under William Hayes and ultimately under Catherine Whitmore. Miss Whitmore is currently in London and won't be available for another 8 hours. I understand you're frustrated, and I want to help resolve this situation. The man's laugh was sharp, humorless. Resolve this situation? Do you even know what's happened? Your company just cost me 3 months of work and potentially millions of dollars because someone couldn't file documents properly. I've got lawyers ready to tear this partnership apart. $20 million annually. Gone. Terrence channeled the calm he'd used when Zoe had her seizure, when falling apart wouldn't help anyone. I understand, sir. I'm not here to make excuses or minimize what's happened. I'm here to find out exactly what went wrong and see if there's a way to fix it before we lose something valuable to both parties. May I ask your name? Richard Peaton. Peaton Development. Mr. Peaton, can you walk me through exactly what happened? Timeline, specific errors, what you need to see corrected. There was a knock. Sarah entered with a tablet, handed it to Terrence with eyes that conveyed both support and terror. The files you requested. Everything we have. Thank you. Terrence reviewed while Peaton talked, building a picture of the disaster. A document misfiled during a staff transition 3 months ago. Deadline missed on March 15th. Renegotiation clause triggered. Seller now demanding an additional $2 million, claiming the missed deadline invalidated the original agreement. His warehouse training kicked in, the ability to see whole systems and understand cascades. So the core issue isn't the misfiled document itself, it's the deadline that was missed because of it, and the renegotiation clause that deadline triggered, correct? Obviously, is the seller's renegotiation demand legally enforceable? Has anyone actually reviewed the clause in question? Peaton blinked. What do you mean? I mean, clauses like that often have exceptions or conditions. Force majeure provisions, notice requirements, things that might make the seller's position weaker than it appears. Terrence pulled up the contract section, scanning for relevant language. Here, the deadline clause requires written notice of extension to be delivered 5 business days in advance. Did Whitmore Global send any such notice? I don't know. Your legal team would have that information. Then that's what we need to find out. Terrence was already typing a message to legal, flagging it as urgent, maximum priority. If notice was sent, even if the document itself was misfiled, we might have grounds to argue the deadline wasn't actually missed in the technical contractual sense. 20 minutes later, 3:14 in the afternoon, legal confirmed. Notice of extension sent by email on March 8th, properly documented, 6 business days before the March 15th deadline. The seller's renegotiation claim was based on a technicality that didn't hold up under scrutiny. 3:21. Terrence slid the tablet across the table. Mr. Peaton, I believe we have grounds to reject the seller's demand entirely. The deadline clause was satisfied. The renegotiation provision shouldn't have been triggered. Peaton read slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise to something approaching relief. This changes everything. If this holds up, we can push back on the seller, close the original deal. That's my understanding. I'd recommend having legal prepare a formal response to the seller's attorneys today, before the situation escalates further. Peaton stood, extended his hand. Terrence shook it, noting the change in grip, now firm but not aggressive. I came here ready to end a partnership worth $20 million. I'm leaving with a solution. I don't know who you are, Cole, but you just saved your company a lot of money and a lot of embarrassment. I'm just someone who saw a problem and tried to fix it. That's rarer than you'd think. Tell Catherine Whitmore that Peaton Development isn't going anywhere. And tell her she's got at least one person on her operations team who actually knows what they're doing. Word spread through the building faster than Terrence would have thought possible. By the time he returned to floor 45 at 4:03, Raymond was waiting with something approaching a grin. Cole, you magnificent bastard. Do you know what you just did? Found a technicality in a contract. You saved a $20 million partnership by walking into a room you had no business being in and doing a job no one asked you to do. Raymond clapped him on the shoulder with surprising force. William's going to lose his mind. William called at 6:47 from the Seattle airport. My office. When I land. 9 tonight. The hours between felt eternal. David kept refreshing something on his computer. watching internal communications as the story spread through the company's digital nervous system. Lisa and Sarah gathered around Terrence's desk with expressions mixing admiration and disbelief. "How did you know about the notice requirement?" Sarah asked. "That's specialized contract knowledge for a warehouse guy." "I didn't know. I just knew contracts usually have conditions and exceptions. Seemed worth checking before accepting the situation was hopeless." At 9:23, William stormed onto floor 45, heading straight for Terrence's office. The door closed, and through the glass walls the team watched, unable to hear but clearly concerned. "Do you know what you did today?" William's voice was hard, clipped with barely controlled emotion. "I overstepped my authority." "Damn right you did. You walked into a meeting with one of our most important clients without permission, backup, or legitimate standing to negotiate on behalf of this company. You made decisions that could have exposed us to legal liability if you'd gotten anything wrong. You bypassed every protocol we have for client relations." Terrence said nothing. If this was termination, arguing wouldn't help. If that meeting had gone badly, if Pettin had filed a complaint or demanded compensation for how he was handled, it would have ended your career before it started. Understand that? "Yes, sir." William was silent for a long moment. Then he turned his laptop screen toward Terrence, displaying an email. From Richard Pettin, received at 7:14 that evening. "I don't know where you found Cole, but keep him. That man turned disaster into success in under an hour. If your whole team operated like that, you'd never have problems." Terrence exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest releasing in stages. "You took a massive risk today. Could have destroyed yourself. Instead, you proved something that takes most people years to demonstrate, that you can perform under pressure without anyone holding your hand." William sat down in the chair across from Terrence's desk. "Catherine called 30 minutes ago. Heard about this from 3 different sources. Know what she said?" "I'm not sure I want to know." "She said, 'I told you he was an opportunity.'" 2 weeks later, Friday, May 24th, at 10 in the morning, William called Terrence to his office with news that would change everything again. Effective immediately, Senior Director of Operations, $115,000, direct report to me, dotted line to Catherine. Responsibilities include handling exactly the situations you handled with Pettin. Crises requiring someone who can think on their feet, act without waiting for permission. But understand this. William's expression was grave. "Tuesday was a success because you were right. If that notice requirement hadn't existed, if you'd made promises we couldn't keep, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Initiative is double-edged. Can save a company or burn it down. The difference is judgment." That evening, Terrence picked up Zoe from Mrs. Banks's apartment, telling her about the promotion without mentioning the risk he'd taken or the consequences that could have destroyed them both. "Does this mean you're important now?" "Means I get to help people solve problems. Like you helped me when I was sick?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart." But at 11:47 that night, lying in bed, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, his phone buzzed with an email that turned his stomach to ice. From Bradley Morrison, CC, Legal Team, HR. Subject: Irregularities in System Access Logs. Terrence opened it with dread building in his chest like water rising in a sealed room. Formal language. Accusations of unauthorized data access. Morrison claimed to have documentation of concerning patterns. Requested immediate investigation into Terrence's activities. Terrence checked his laptop. Nothing unusual. Reviewed recent file accesses. All legitimate, work-related, documented with proper authorization. He didn't understand what Morrison was talking about. But then he remembered. Saturday, May 18th. He'd brought Zoe to the office because Mrs. Banks had a doctor's appointment. Zoe had drawn pictures at his desk while he caught up on work. He'd left the office for 20 minutes to get her a snack from the cafeteria. When he returned, his laptop had been moved slightly on the desk. He'd thought nothing of it at the time, assumed the cleaning crew had shifted things. Realization hit like ice water flooding his veins. Morrison had been planning this, waiting for the perfect moment, and Terrence had handed it to him on Saturday when he'd left his laptop unattended in an empty office. He closed his eyes, but sleep was impossible now. Thursday morning would bring the nightmare he'd feared since day one. The accusation that would confirm every bias, every stereotype, every reason people had for not hiring someone who looked like him in the first place. For a black man in corporate America, one accusation could destroy everything. The truth didn't matter as much as the perception, and Morrison knew that. That's why he'd chosen this weapon. Thursday morning, May 30th, 8:15. Floor 45 felt different the moment Terrence stepped off the elevator. The energy had shifted from organized chaos to something more like a funeral. Conversations stopping mid-sentence as he walked past. Eyes that had been friendly yesterday now sliding away to find something fascinating about computer screens or ceiling tiles. Raymond's face was grave when he appeared at Terrence's desk. "William wants to see you. Now." HR is with him. The walk to William's office took 14 steps that felt like 14 miles. Through the glass walls, Terrence could see two figures, William behind his desk and a woman he didn't recognize sitting across from him. Patricia Henderson, he would learn later, HR director, 50 years old with the kind of neutral expression that came from delivering bad news so often it stopped registering as tragedy. "Sit down, Terrence." William's voice was measured, professional, stripped of the warmth that had developed over 3 months. "I received a formal complaint this morning from Bradley Morrison. He claims you've been accessing confidential files outside your authorization level. Legal documents, M&A negotiations, privileged attorney-client communications. He's alleging corporate espionage. Wants you terminated immediately." William turned his monitor so Terrence could see the access logs. His login credentials. 14 instances over 3 weeks, May 9th through May 28th. Files with names like Riverside Acquisition Internal Memo and Piton Renegotiation Strategy and Q4 Legal Exposure Analysis. Timestamps showing late nights and weekends, times when the office would have been empty, when no one would have witnessed the alleged theft. "That's not true." Terrence kept his voice steady despite his heart trying to hammer its way through his ribs. "I've never accessed files I wasn't supposed to access. I don't even know how to access the legal database." "The logs show your credentials, Mr. Cole." Patricia's voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone who'd conducted these investigations 100 times and knew better than to take sides before all evidence was gathered. "Someone used my credentials without my knowledge. This is fraud." Patricia's expression didn't change. "This is going to HR and legal for full investigation. Standard procedure. You're suspended with pay until the matter is resolved. Could be days, could be weeks. You'll need to surrender your access badge and leave the building immediately." After Patricia left, William spoke quietly, barely above a whisper, words meant only for Terrence's ears. "Between us, Cole, I don't believe Morrison's complaint. Timing's too convenient, right after the Peton success. But I can't protect you from an official investigation. The evidence will have to speak for itself." Terrence left the building at 9:03 in a daze. The security guard who'd been so friendly on his first day now avoided eye contact, taking his temporary badge with mechanical efficiency. By now, everyone would know. The whisper network in corporate environments moved faster than official communications, spreading gossip like wildfire through dried brush. His phone buzzed as he reached the street. Text from Mrs. Banks. Zoe's ear hurting again. "Should I take her to doctor?" The subway ride to Brooklyn existed in fragments, moments of clarity punctuated by stretches where his mind simply refused to process what was happening. A black man accused of corporate espionage. The narrative was so predictable it felt like parody, except parodies were supposed to be funny, and nothing about this made him want to laugh. This was the story people expected, The confirmation of biases so deeply embedded, they didn't even recognize them as biases anymore. The pediatrician's office was crowded with the usual collection of crying children and exhausted parents. Zoe sat in his lap, small body radiating heat from another infection, the third in 3 months transforming into a pattern that suggested something more systemic might be wrong. Another round of antibiotics. The doctor was young, probably fresh out of residency, with the kind of optimism that hadn't been worn down by years of insurance companies and chronic cases. $78 for the stronger medication. But Terrence had insurance now. Had insurance. The copay was only $15, a small mercy that felt like mockery given what was happening. Evening came with Zoe curled against him on the couch, feverish and small, her trust in him absolute and terrifying. "Daddy, you have that worry look. Something difficult happened at work, sweetheart. Someone said I did a bad thing I didn't do. Now I have to wait while other people figure out the truth. That's not fair." "No, it's not. What are you going to do?" "Trust that the truth will come out. And take care of you. Because that's what daddies do." Mrs. Banks brought soup, her presence a steady anchor in waters that felt increasingly turbulent. "I've seen you face harder things than this, Terrence. You'll get through it. Just keep doing what you've always done. Tell the truth, stand tall, trust in justice." But Terrence knew that justice wasn't always reliable for people who looked like him. History had taught that lesson with brutal consistency. The criminal justice system, the housing market, the job market, even here in a glass tower where everyone wore expensive suits and talked about diversity initiatives, the underlying structure remained unchanged. Suspicion fell differently depending on skin color. Friday afternoon, May 31st at 3:17, Raymond called with information that made everything worse. Hearing scheduled Monday, June 3rd, 10 a.m. You'll defend yourself in front of HR, legal, and Catherine. Morrison will present his evidence. You'll have a chance to respond. The weekend became an exercise in controlled panic. Saturday, June 1st, Terrence pulled every calendar, receipt, phone record, text message from May, building an alibi for each timestamp Morrison had flagged. The work was meticulous, obsessive, the kind of detail-oriented preparation that came from knowing a single mistake could destroy everything. May 9th, 11:47 p.m. The logs claimed he'd accessed confidential files. Actually, he'd been home with Zoe, her ear infection flaring badly enough that he'd picked up a prescription at 8:34 from the CVS on Atlantic Avenue. He had the pharmacy receipt, time-stamped and itemized. He had text messages to Mrs. Banks confirming he was home all night, asking for advice on managing Zoe's fever. May 15th, 2:30 p.m. The logs showed file access during work hours. Actually, he'd been in a meeting with William and 3 team members in conference room C. Everyone's calendars showed it. 2 to 4 p.m., quarterly planning session. 5 people could confirm he'd been physically present in that room, nowhere near his computer. May 21st, 9:15 p.m. More alleged file access. Actually, he'd been at Zoe's school for her spring concert, the event program listing him as a volunteer usher. Mrs. Banks had been there too. Dozens of witnesses. Photographic evidence that parents had posted to social media. The pattern was clear. Someone had used his credentials at times when he could prove he was elsewhere. The question was whether anyone would believe him, whether the presumption would be innocence or guilt. Sunday, June 2nd, at 1:47 in the morning, sleep as distant as it had been every night that week, his phone buzzed with a text that made his breath catch. "Catherine Whitmore, are you awake?" "Yes. Me too. Can't sleep when a good employee is being treated unfairly. Can we talk?" The conversation that followed lasted 32 minutes, Catherine's voice different than he'd ever heard it. Vulnerable in ways that seemed impossible for someone who'd built an empire on projecting invincibility. "I'm scared I was wrong about you, Terrence." The admission came quietly, almost reluctantly. Scared to trust someone who doesn't deserve it. I've made that mistake before. It cost me everything I thought mattered at the time. What if you're not wrong? Then it would be the first time in a very long time someone surprised me in a good way. Everyone disappoints eventually. People show you who they are when something's at stake, and usually who they are is worse than who they pretended to be. Terrence heard the loneliness in her voice, the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment above all else, because trusting others had proven too costly. Not everyone. Some people stay. Some people are exactly who they say they are. Are you one of those people? I am. I promise you I am. Silence stretched between them, filled with things neither knew how to say. Then Catherine's voice again, softer. I want to believe that, more than you know. This company, it's everything I built, but it's also everything I sacrificed. Sometimes I wonder if the trade was worth it. What did you sacrifice? Everything that matters. Marriage that fell apart because I couldn't stop working long enough to notice it was dying. Relationship with my son Marcus that I'm only now trying to rebuild. Friendships. The chance to be a person instead of a position. The ability to trust that someone might value me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can give them. It's not too late to have those things. Isn't it? I'm 52, set in my ways, don't know how to be anything except CEO, Catherine Whitmore. Maybe you don't have to stop being CEO. Maybe you just have to let people see Catherine too. Long pause, then. You already do that, don't you? See Catherine instead of CEO? I do. That's terrifying and comforting, both at the same time. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I should let you sleep. Monday's going to be difficult. Catherine? Yes? Thank you for believing in me. Even if you're scared you might be wrong. After she hung up, Terrence lay in the darkness thinking about what she'd revealed. The loneliness that success had brought her. The walls she'd built so high that no one could reach her. And now she was trapped inside them, wondering if there was a way out. He understood that feeling. He'd built his own walls after Vanessa left, constructed barriers to protect Zoe from further abandonment, even if it meant protecting her from the possibility of love. Monday, June 3rd, 9:47 a.m. The hearing room on floor 46 was set up like a courtroom, a deliberate choice that made the proceeding feel less like an investigation and more like a trial. Left side, Bradley Morrison plus 2 attorneys in expensive suits, leather briefcases that probably cost more than Terrence's monthly rent. Right side, Terrence alone, no attorney, no representation, just the truth and a folder full of evidence that he prayed would be enough. Head table, Catherine Whitmore, HR Director Patricia, and an outside consultant whose presence suggested the company was taking this seriously enough to bring in objective oversight. Catherine hadn't looked at Terrence since he entered, her face unreadable. 10 o'clock exactly. Patricia opened proceedings with the kind of formal language that made everything sound worse than it was, or maybe made it sound exactly as bad as it was. This hearing addresses allegations of unauthorized system access and potential corporate espionage made against Terrence Cole by Bradley Morrison. Mr. Morrison, please present your evidence. Morrison stood with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance until it felt natural, professional, polished. The kind of presentation that came from 12 years of courtroom experience, from knowing how to construct a narrative that sounded true regardless of whether it was. The evidence is clear and comprehensive. Morrison activated a screen displaying the access logs in harsh detail. 14 instances over 3 weeks, dates, times, files accessed. These files relate to pending acquisitions, litigation strategy, sensitive negotiations. None fall within Mr. Cole's authorized scope or legitimate job responsibilities. The pattern suggests a systematic attempt to gather confidential information, possibly for sale to competitors, possibly for personal gain in future negotiations. He built his case brick by brick, each piece of evidence stacking on the previous one, creating a structure that looked solid until you examined it closely enough to see the gaps. But Morrison was good. He anticipated objections, addressed them before they could be raised, created a narrative so compelling that doubt seemed unreasonable. The evidence speaks for itself. Morrison's conclusion came with the gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence. Mr. Cole has violated company policy, breached his fiduciary duty, and engaged in corporate espionage. I recommend immediate termination for gross misconduct and referral to law enforcement for potential criminal charges. The room was silent, the weight of the accusation settling like snow, cold and suffocating. Terrence felt every eye on him, felt the presumption shifting from innocent until proven guilty to guilty until proven innocent, the way it always did for people who looked like him. Patricia turned to Terrence, her expression neutral. Mr. Cole, you may present your defense. Terrence stood. No slides, no attorneys, no polished presentation, just the truth and the hope that truth would be enough. Everything Mr. Morrison just said is a lie. I have never accessed the legal database, never viewed confidential files outside my authorization, never used my position for anything other than assigned work. Someone used my credentials fraudulently, and I can prove it. He pulled out the printed calendars and receipts, evidence gathered with the meticulous care of someone who knew his life depended on getting every detail right. Mr. Morrison, you said there was access on May 9th at 11:47 p.m. At that exact time, I was home with my daughter who had an ear infection. I can provide medical records from the pediatrician appointment that day, pharmacy receipt showing I picked up her prescription at 8:34 p.m., text messages to Mrs. Banks confirming I was home all night. Morrison's smile didn't waver. You could have accessed remotely. I don't have remote access to the legal database. IT can verify I was never granted those permissions. I barely have access to the files I need for my actual job. The idea that I could remotely access legal documents is technically impossible given my authorization level. He continued through each timestamp, methodically dismantling Morrison's narrative. May 15th, log shows access at 2:30 p.m. At that exact time, I was in a meeting with William Hayes and 3 team members in conference room C. Meeting documented on everyone's calendars lasted 2 to 4 p.m. 5 people can confirm I was physically present in that room. Patricia was making notes, her expression still neutral, but her pen moving faster now. We'll verify that. Please do, because if my credentials were being used while I was physically present elsewhere, that proves someone else was using them. Someone with access to my login information and knowledge of legal systems. Someone who had opportunity and motive to frame me for something I didn't do. The words hung in the air, an accusation without naming names, but everyone in the room knew who Terrence was implying. Morrison's smile finally flickered, a crack in the performance. Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice cold as steel cutting through the tension. Mr. Morrison, were these discrepancies investigated before you filed your complaint? Morrison hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The access logs are generally reliable as evidence of, that's not what I asked. Catherine's eyes had gone glacial. Did you or your team verify that Mr. Cole was physically present at his workstation during the alleged access times? The logs seemed sufficient. Seemed convenient? Catherine leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Morrison's face. A new employee rising quickly, earning respect, saving a major client relationship. Perfect target for someone wanting to eliminate competition. She turned to Patricia. Suspend this hearing. I want full forensic analysis of access logs, not just timestamps, IP addresses, physical login locations, device identifiers, keystroke patterns, everything. I want to know exactly how Terrence Cole's credentials ended up in places where Terrence Cole wasn't. The hearing adjourned at 10:37. Terrence returned to the waiting room while IT forensics began their work, the minutes stretching into hours that felt like days. He checked his phone compulsively, watching time pass with agonizing slowness. Noon, 1 p.m., 2, 3, 4. At 5:47, Patricia appeared with an expression that had shifted from neutral to something approaching anger. The kind of anger that came from discovering you'd been lied to, that your time had been wasted on a vendetta disguised as evidence. "We have the results. Please return to the hearing room." 5:53. Everyone reassembled. Patricia didn't waste time with preamble. IT Forensics has completed their analysis. Every single access flagged in Mr. Morrison's complaint originated from a computer in Mr. Morrison's office. IP address matches his assigned workstation. Device fingerprint consistent with his laptop. Further investigation revealed keylogger software installed on Mr. Cole's computer on May 18th, capturing his credentials. Mr. Morrison systematically planted evidence over 3 weeks, waiting for maximum impact before filing his complaint. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison's face had gone pale, his attorneys exchanging glances that suggested they were already calculating exits and liability. Patricia continued, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Additional investigation uncovered a pattern. In 2021, Mr. Morrison made similar accusations against a former employee, Jennifer Campbell, who resigned rather than fight the allegations. That case was settled quietly. Evidence suggests Mr. Morrison has a history of targeting employees he perceives as threats, particularly minority employees who advance quickly. Catherine's expression was carved from ice. "Mr. Morrison, you're terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Personal items will be boxed and sent. Consider yourself fortunate we're not pursuing criminal charges for fraud and defamation." Morrison tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. But Catherine had already turned away, dismissing him from existence with the finality of someone who didn't waste energy on people who'd proven themselves worthless. 6:15. Terrence stood in the now empty hearing room, his hands shaking with adrenaline and relief and delayed fear. Patricia approached with something that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Cole, on behalf of the company, I apologize for what you've been put through. Your suspension is lifted immediately. You're cleared to return to work tomorrow." After she left, Catherine remained, standing by the windows that offered a view of the city beginning its evening transformation. When she turned, something in her face had changed. The armor had cracked, showing the person underneath. "I owe you an apology." Her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "When Morrison filed his complaint, I had doubts. For exactly 47 seconds, I wondered if I'd been wrong about you. If the man I hired based on instinct and 37 minutes of conversation had turned out to be the fraud that cynics always warn about." She walked toward the sitting area, gesturing for Terrence to join her. They sat across from each other without a desk between them, the absence of that physical barrier making the moment feel more intimate than any conversation they'd had before. "That doubt was unfair to you. You've given me no reason for it. But I've been CEO for 26 years, and in that time I've been deceived, manipulated, used by people I trusted. So yes, for 47 seconds, I wondered. You didn't know me well enough not to wonder. Any reasonable person would have doubts. I'm not any reasonable person, Terrence. I'm the one who hired you, who saw something in you that first morning. I should have trusted that judgment." Catherine's hands were clasped in her lap, her posture more open than he'd ever seen it. "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone else in this company." Terrence waited, sensing this was important, that whatever she was about to share would change something between them. "When I was 26, I had nothing. No money, no connections, no credentials that opened doors. My family was working class. Father was a mechanic, Mother cleaned houses. I had an idea for a real estate deal and stubborn belief I could make it work. Everyone told me I was crazy. My fiance told me to get a real job, stop dreaming above my station. So I borrowed money from everyone who would lend it. Family, friends, credit cards at 22% interest. Even a loan shark who charged 18%. Worked 20-hour days for 6 months straight. Made every mistake imaginable. But somehow I turned a profit. She looked at Terrence directly. You were like me, invisible until you proved otherwise. Except you had something I never did. You had a daughter depending on you. A reason to succeed that went beyond ambition or pride. Every time you talk about Zoe, every decision you make for her, I see motivation I was never quite able to summon for myself. You built an empire. That takes motivation. It takes drive, hunger, need to prove everyone wrong. But those are selfish motivations, Terrence. About me, proving my worth, accumulating power, showing the world I mattered. You're not driven by that. You're driven by love. The words settled between them with unexpected weight. Catherine's eyes were bright, tears forming but not falling. I've accomplished a great deal, built a company worth billions, employed thousands, created something that will outlast me. But I've never had what you have, someone who loves me unconditionally, someone who makes the whole struggle worthwhile. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm 52, been married to this company for 26 years, married to an actual person for 7 years before that, but he left because I couldn't be both wife and CEO. He wanted me to choose. I chose this. She gestured around the room, encompassing the building, the company, the empire. My son Marcus is 26, lives in Portland, calls once a month if I'm lucky. We're strangers who share DNA. I don't know how to be anything except this. Watching you balance work and family, how you never lose sight of what matters, it makes me wonder what I might have had if I'd made different choices. You wouldn't have built Whitmore Global? No, I wouldn't have. Catherine looked at him with tears now visible, tracking slowly down her face. But I might have been happier. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that felt dangerous. Terrence wanted to reach across the space separating them, to offer comfort or connection, or something that acknowledged the courage it took to admit that kind of regret. But before he could move, Catherine stood, wiping her eyes, her voice shifting towards something more professional. I'm promoting you again, Senior Vice President of Operations. $165,000 base salary plus equity that vests over 3 years. You'll report directly to me with authority to intervene in any operational crisis across the company. Catherine, I've only been here 4 months. You've demonstrated you can handle it. Patton situation, Morrison investigation. You stay calm under pressure, fight for truth even when odds are against you. Don't let setbacks destroy you. She paused. And whatever you do, maintain whatever it is that keeps you grounded. I've seen too many people lose themselves in this work. Forget families, values, things that made them worthwhile. You told me Zoe comes first. I'm holding you to that. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why me? 4 months ago, I walked into the wrong interview room. I wasn't supposed to be here. You could have sent me away and never thought about me again. Catherine was quiet, her gaze drifting to the city below where lights were beginning to come on like stars, falling to earth. Because you reminded me of someone. Someone I was a long time ago, before I built all this, before I forgot what it felt like to need something more than success. I needed to see if people like us could still exist, people who tell the truth, who stay kind when the world punishes kindness, who measure worth in something other than quarterly earnings. She looked back at him. And do we? You do. And that gives me hope that maybe I can learn again. Maybe it's not too late to be a person instead of just a position. The moment stretched, charged with possibility and fear, and something neither of them was ready to name. Terrence's phone buzzed, Zoe's name on the screen breaking the spell. "I should take this." Catherine nodded. "Family first." "Daddy, when are you coming home?" Zoe's voice was small, worried in the way children got when they sensed something wrong, even if they didn't understand what. "Mrs. Banks says the bad person can't hurt you anymore." "That's right, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay now. Promise?" "Promise." After the call, Catherine was watching him with an expression he'd never seen before. Something soft, wistful, as if she was looking at a life she'd never allowed herself to want. "She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her." Catherine walked him to the door. As Terrence reached for the handle, her hand touched his arm. Brief, barely there, but deliberate. "Thank you, Terrence, for seeing me. Not the CEO or billionaire, just Catherine. Always." The elevator descent carried him away from Catherine's vulnerability and back toward the life he'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as senior vice president, but tonight he needed to go home to Zoe and Mrs. Banks, to the small apartment that held everything that truly mattered. And somewhere between the professional obligations and personal possibilities, between the wrong door that had led him here and the future he was still building, Terrence understood one thing with perfect clarity. Sometimes the person you never expected to meet becomes the person you can't imagine living without. The question was whether he was brave enough to find out what came next.